Well, hello again. I'm so happy to share this rainy Sunday here in Detroit, Michigan, with Reverend David Parry over in good old Londonium. And as is our want to do, today we're going to carry on further in our 17th episode of What is Truth, which is, if there ever was a catch-all statement, I think that would be it. And again, I'd like to enter into this conversation from a short thing by Wilhelm Wolfgang von Goethe from the fairy tale of the green snake and the beautiful lily, wherein the king says, "From whence come you?" And the snake replies, "From the caverns where the gold dwells." What is grander than gold? Light. What is more refreshing than light? Conversation. And with that, greetings, David. I hope you have your tea or your coffee, or whether you've gone American on us and now you're drinking coffee.
I do imbibe in coffee on a regular basis, I confess. I know the Puritans, the Pilgrim Fathers, and God bless them. I don't easily see eye to eye with everything they say, but God bless them. They were worried about things like coffee, but hey, I'm a firm buttocks radical. What can I say? So I like a good cup of coffee sometimes. I love a cup of tea, and it's very good to see you, John, again after your tribulations with YouTube.
Yeah, my little brief hiatus. Apparently, they didn't like me sharing something from our friend Alex, and whose name is unmentionable. But anyways, whatever. So I took that post down. It had already met its mark anyways. And so we'll just move on. As this is more of a cultural, spiritual configuration of this modern journey, and where we're trying to find a human context within the encroaching forces of the technocracy and what is globalism and all that kind of stuff. And I think that we could say, in challenge to what is globalism, what is sovereignty, and what is the place of the individual within this world, this world that as I've frequently reiterated, is the fourth world. So it's the human world, and that there were three preceding stages that led up to this present Earth evolution, which was confirmed to me by Thomas Benyakya, the spokesman for the Hopi elders, who also have a teaching that the planet Earth, the physical planet Earth that we have right now, is the fourth world. And so in keeping with this, as is my personal path, I work primarily out of the work of Rudolf Steiner, and because I have a feeling we may have some new visitors, I'm going to give them a little bit of a summation of what's going on here. But since in high school, when I first became aware of the work of Rudolf Steiner, gradually over the years, it became the central theme of my particular spiritual quest, that was stoked by certain riddles that happened to me in my own personal experience of consciousness, and leaving my body consciously and experiencing worlds of light and all these wonderful things can build in oneself some unanswered soft questions, shall we say. And it's in an effort to try and come to terms with that, and try to see what might be relevant for a person who's trying to maintain their relationship to their cultural heritage, but not get lost in the sea of encrusted nationalism that can be the counter image of what that's meant to be. And Rudolf Steiner spoke very succinctly about the tendency towards nationalism can be a real problem. But it, I think, has to be viewed in the light of what one means by that. And with the current state of affairs here in the United States, the real issue that's on the table during the current political environment has to do more with the context of what is freedom and how is this to find its way within the levels of technocracy capability that's present at this time. And you have to see that there's in anthroposophy a very developed view of what is a human being, meaning that a human being is more than just a physical, shall we say, bag of bones and chemical processes, that materialism as it stands is incapable of solving the riddle of what is a human being, according to the thinking of people like Charles Darwin and like the utilitarian philosophers that came out of the work of Jeremy Bentham, who's so lovingly embalmed and is there to visit in the lobby of one of David's alma maters, I believe, University College London. But that being said, to give me a greater context in which to be able to frame the conversation, I've written 2 books, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order, and the sequel to that, more of a meditative tool, The Arcana of Light on the Path, showing the 22 facets of contemplation that are framed within the context of the 22 passages sequence of Mabel Collins' Light on the Path, which is the original meditative guide that Rudolf Steiner worked with when he was head of the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society in Germany. But to supplement my studies, I was able to create an immense database of esoteric literature in the huge esoteric library of a friend of ours. I was the manager of the Mayflower Bookshop, which is the largest metaphysical esoteric bookstore in the world, and we were told that we were the largest outlet at that time of the works of Rudolf Steiner. And after that, I created some 15,000 volume relational database based on the system I used for the esoteric library, where you could look up particular topics. But in this relational database, the second one I made was on ancient Egypt and Mesopotamian studies, working out of the cuneiform of Mesopotamia and the hieroglyphics of ancient Egypt, and try to look in there and see if I could find any of the tenets expressed. And it's quite challenging as consciousness evolves, which is one of the central themes of Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy. Now, my friend here, Reverend David Parry, is quite an accomplished individual himself, being that he is a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society, and he has founded numerous churches in Africa and Kenya, and he's written several books, of which one is David Parry's Caliban's Redemption, which is his poetic musings, And The Grammar of Witchcraft, which, as I have frequently said, is not about witchcraft, but it's a Shakespearean study. And then his Mount Athos Inside Me, a book, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. And these books can be found on Amazon. My books, on the other hand, can be found on eBay in the continental United States. If you happen to be outside of the US, you can contact me directly through a private message on Facebook. And I've been shipping books to England and Canada and Israel and Poland and all manner of places. And so just trying to get that out there. Now, what is accomplished within my books, or attempted, I shouldn't say accomplished, that's too big of a word, but within there, oh yeah, there's the alchemical poem by Comte de Saint-Germain in my own translation. But there are many esoteric diagrams that frame the cosmology that is encompassed within the 7 and the 12, the 7 being the 7-fold sequence of evolution, and the 12 being the 12 pairs of the 24 cranial nerves that inhabit the skull, where we inhabit our thinking. But that thinking is basically, here's the, you see Kefra. This is the dung beetle. This is a gift to me from Dr. Marjorie Fisher, the Egyptologist whose database I created. And what this is very akin to the shape of the human head. And the dung beetle takes its eggs and lays them within dung. and then they hatch out of dung. I think that that's very relevant as far as the comments that Rudolf Steiner's made as to the nature of thinking in the head, the oldest part of a human being, that it's like dung. It's an after image or an echo or a shadow of the life of thinking that could potentially, if it arises out of our inner being, be something that takes place within the whole human being and brings us into relationship to all 9 hierarchy. Whereas if we remain within the abstract thinking, within the human skull, then we're at the mercy of the Ahrimanic or satanic tendencies and the Luciferic tendencies. The Luciferic being the realm of effulgent light that would like us to dissolve into a ghostly realm, whereas the realm of Ahriman would like to harden us into a technotronic singularity. And now that we see that this is increasingly relevant today through the likes of the tech moguls that are attempting to rule the world, it becomes increasingly relevant that we try and fortify our spiritual basis, because it's out of the spiritual basis that our future evolution depends, and we cannot depend on our physical being giving us the in-streaming inspirations in the same manner that they might have experienced it in the ancient world. So in that context, with my wonderful Gnostic pastor, David William Parry, I'd like to throw it over to you.
Thank you, John. Gnostic inspired. And that stuff is far too deep to claim anything, you know, unless you're working on a much higher level of consciousness, I suspect. Yeah, I admit that Valentine's Hall, which is Oasis community within Metropolitan Community Church, we are exploring Valentinian Gnosticism. We personally find him, of course, lots of scholars would agree with that. We find him overtly Christian and Catholic in a in a very esoteric way, and maybe in a true way, as opposed to the people that say it nowadays. So we're inspired by his thoughts, his prayers, his meditations, his speculations. We meditate on some of his theology. I mean, we hold communion in the sort of normal way, but I've noticed our meditation circle, which has been going for quite a few years now, 3 or 4 years now, that really, I mean, we've stuck to our guns. We've looked at all sorts of, wonderful things that guest speakers have brought to the circle. But at the end of the day, we always seem to return to Gnosticism, primarily Christian Gnosticism, although there are other types, of course, that has come up. But I suppose we named my church, my new church group, Valentine's Hall, because we're not only thinking of Saint Valentine. Some people say the works of Valentine has got smuggled in to the legend of Saint Valentine. I don't know. I mean, it's a possibility. But certainly we find the works of Valentinus nourishing. We find them enlightening, and we're hoping in some way or other to get a greater sense of the Christian commitment and witness necessary in the modern world by balancing the timeless with the timed, with the temporal. So Gnostic with I don't want to say with speech marks in parentheses, but certainly one of my ordinations was in Valentinian Gnosticism. Otherwise, I didn't feel we could start spouting about it on a weekly basis. So I thought that was necessary, and that was actually done in Italy, in a monastery in Italy. And there's another tale to tell at some point. But yeah, I mean, we feel inspired by someone, as I think I've said on this show before, if you'd have asked Valentinus, are you a Gnostic? That question would have made no sense to him. If it would have made sense to anybody, I mean, that was a term used by people in the ancient world to basically beat off opponents or rivals and say, you're not one of us. I mean, if you'd have asked him, he'd have said Father Valentinus, member of the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, he wouldn't really have known what you were talking about. So yes, it's a theological view. On other notes, gosh, I mean, I suppose he and Swedenborg have been huge influences on me. I find Swedenborg the one and only true Western shaman. A giant of a man, a giant of intellect, a naturalist, a scientist who started to have visions, of course, and claimed that he spent 30 years exploring the realms nearby this one. I suspect there are others further away. But, and documenting them, I mean, that's a unique achievement, maybe a unique global achievement. And I don't know, that's a personal thing. I mean, we haven't really looked at it in Valentine's Hall much, but certainly it's had a huge influence on me. And the fact we can explore these things, we don't just have to swallow doctrines and dogmas, and through our prayers and through our meditations, and sometimes more than that, if the Spirit is with us, that we can look at these supernal realms and these lofty heights and get great benefit from that. And faith needn't be afraid. What was it Kierkegaard said about Christianity? Either or. That's the title of one of his books. Either it's true or it's not. There we are. That's the end of it. But what if it is? What if it is true? And of course, that's what the modern world doesn't seem to want to engage with, because that is a possibility too. Yes, it might be true. And if it is true, what does that mean? On the level of nationalism, I mean, there's a real synchronicity when you and I get together. I co-founded a couple of years ago. Oh my God, I can't remember how many years ago. 5 years ago, something called Extremist Club in London, whereby what we would do is we had to think of audiences. I mean, my co-founder, who better remain nameless because he's gone into permanent hiding or something along those lines, wanted to call it something boring like the Radicals Club. And I was on the way home after meeting him for coffee, and I thought, well, if it was the 1800s, I bet that sounds great. Anyway, there is a Radicals Club. It's called the Reform Club. So we won't get anyone to come at all. So I thought, no, we need something catchy. One of those words that bounces around the media. So we called it Extremist Club. What we meant was a club of extremes. So you didn't have to be a type of extremist. You were welcome if you had a strong view on anything, really. And we had some extremely talented people because we were using it that way as well. I mean, one of my favourite evenings is when we had Gillian Haslam, who's Anglo-Indian and a millionairess, who wrote a book called Indian English. She started on the streets destitute in India. Now, shortly after the partition, her family were dirt poor and managed to pull herself up to being an international banking executive and a millionairess. Now, that's not bad going. So, so we had her talking about her life, her story, and her book. And we had a wonderful lady called Sundus Abbas, who is representing the rights of Turkmen across various parts of the Caucasus, Central Asia. I think we were all horrified at the way they were treated. Isn't it astonishing how badly human beings can treat other human beings? It really never stops amazing me how far things can go. But she that's her life. She's not simply an activist; it's her life. So we had this incredible sort of fest of thoughts and feminine energy that evening. I mean, we looked at folklore. We did have politics. I mean, we had some left wingers. We had some right wingers. I could never put my finger on how a meeting was going to go, and this is what started it, John. We had one of my dear friends who was a bloody communist. He turned up. He was going to be a guest, just a bum on a seat, in among the congregation, amongst the audience, and one of the bloody speakers didn't turn up. So I said, right, I've known you for years, get up and do something. And he started singing Marxist songs with all the right-wingers joining in. I mean, how did they know the words? And they thought that was one of the best times they'd had at the club. So I realised after that incident, I could never really put my finger on what was going to happen next. We had rave reviews for 2 years. We were attacked in the press, actually, as we were running out of steam. That was a bit curious, by the minor gutter press, I hasten to add. We reformed it into something called the Free Speech Club. Since this is not an age for delicacy and sophistication, you've got to nail everything to the mast, because that's effectively what it was, a free speech club. But I think by that time people thought they got our number, and of course there was Hope Not Hate, my favourite periodical. Hope Not Hate. I was attacked, even though I got this bizarre email saying, "We know you don't think those things," and what things do you think I don't think? And I said, well, okay, I'll let bygones be bygones. Give me an apology, which they never bloody did. They said they would, but they didn't. So much for lefties. But I mean, I think to be, the club, after 3 years of monthly meetings, I mean, that is quite a turnover. We'd really run out of steam at that particular time, and we'll probably revive it in 2022. I'm trying to relocate it to the British House of Lords, because we've got a Pakistani firebrand, Baroness Udine, who likes a bit of a Barney. She likes a row, but she's one of the few people in the country that seems to have a schedule busier than mine. So I don't know. We haven't managed to pin her down yet and say, look, woman, you've got to commit to one day, one evening a month. It's simple as that. But we'll probably, as I say, revive that in 2022. Hopefully, if the angels want that, we'll see what happens. Nationalism. Oh, gosh. I've known nationalists in my day. Of course, most of them were Central Asian. So it really does depend what you mean. I mean, one of my dear friends is Mukhtar Shakhanov, a Nobel Prize-winning poet who was a deputy in the Kremlin. That is no mean position, and an ambassador for Kazakhstan to various countries, who Gorbachev personally accuses of destroying the Soviet Union. That's a bit stiff. It must have taken more than one man, surely. And I'll have to send you and our viewers it's my favourite photograph of my dear friend. This short, burly Kazakh who knows how many blue beans make 5 and doesn't take prisoners. And what they used to do, because they're as sneaky as we are, what they used to do even if you had that position, you're a deputy in the Kremlin. They still want to know what you're going to say to people. My God, there's no mercy anywhere. So he had to go up to them during the last time he was allowed to speak and say, comrades, I want to talk about the ecological tragedy of the Aral Sea. Now, if anybody knows about that, Russian engineers basically were using the Aral Sea for drainage to help infertile lands come back to life. It turned into a total disaster, and now not only are the lands not irrigated, but the Aral Sea is disappearing. You know, the world's first major economic and ecological disaster. It's a disaster on every level. So he said, comrades, I want to talk about that. They didn't trust him, but he was a deputy, so they couldn't say no. And the minute he got to the lectern, he started shouting at Gorbachev, you have destroyed Kazakhstan. And my favorite picture is where they're physically pulling him off the rostrum, because you see this finger pointing at Gorbachev and Gorbachev ducking because he doesn't know how to respond. And the uprush of that story is, before I round off, is Gorbachev was so shocked and incensed. You know, did he win the Nobel Prize? My God, that man didn't deserve it. You ought to hear what the Central Asians say about Gorbachev. You know, he was hauled into Gorbachev's office after the meeting with Gorbachev screaming, I will find a way to shut your mouth. Now, we all know what that means. We all know what that means. But to his detriment, there was this young guy called Boris Yeltsin who was on the way up and had more contacts in the KGB than Gorbachev realized. So fortunately, my friend didn't swallow a bullet and went on to create even bigger problems further down the line. So he would say, if you asked him, he's a nationalist. So what does that mean in Kazakhstan? It means he loves the culture, he loves the history, he loves the language, and he's trying to protect those things against a lingering Soviet atmosphere, which would just like to destroy them. And he finds great treasure and great value in that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful culture and its costumes and its customs and its folklore. So that's a type of nationalism. I know people in the UK that think those things are under attack. I've also met some crypto Nazis, but some of my friends are communists, some of my friends are crypto communists. You know, so I think being liberal, being a libertarian in the way I'm using it, means you keep an ear open to everybody. You know, I like a good chinwag personally, but I think we've got to be careful. I don't know how it is in America, John. We've got to be careful of words like nationalism, as you said very wisely a minute ago, because it's got so many, you know, upturns and downturns, and really we need, you know, a really strong definitional session before anything like that comes up. And if we have it, I'm sure none of us will be any the wiser afterwards. Personally, I can't rule the whole thing out because my wonderful friends across Central Asia were desperate for their countries to return to them and desperate for the pride of living in their own culture. They're not, you know, they're not hiding from the rest of the world. They don't want to stop trading with the rest of the world. They're great humanitarians. In some ways, they're great universalists, much more than Britain at the minute. But, you know, they want to preserve their own culture. Personally, I can't see anything wrong with that. So I noticed in the election, I'm a great Americanophile, and I'm a Constitution worshipper. I think everybody knows that by now. So the invective that's been flowing around over the last couple of days in Yankee land is completely beyond me. I'm only a Brit. I don't understand the half of it. There's that strange woman, the presidentess-elect or something, you know, that goes around grinning at cameras. And you know, can you say something, love, before you start grinning? You know, why are you grinning? So, you know, the whole thing has left me in complete confusion. I just hope nobody throws away the Constitution, because Americans don't know how lucky they are having a written Constitution where you all know there's something to protect you. We don't have that in this country, and I really wish we did. Handing over to you, John.
Yeah, you have to kind of hearken back to really early documents to point to some semblance of representation within the halls of government, and then you have literally mountains of court precedents that one need have recourse to just to find a relevant case to back up your perspective. It was actually codified. Much of it was codified by a distant relation of mine, and so you have the law books that people consult were codified by him, which is kind of funny. But Barnwell, that branch of the family, I continually, for my own soul nourishment regarding these issues, I continually return to Friedrich von Hardenberg, or he wrote under the name Novalis, and he died in his early 30s, very early age, but he's one of the most vital persons of which Rudolf Steiner makes reference within anthroposophy or spiritual science. And Novalis says, partial histories are completely impossible. Each history must be a world history, for only through its relationship to all of history is the historical treatment of an individual situation possible. So there you have it. It's that one of the dilemmas today is that people want quick answers, and they expect that there's some kind of way in which these things can be codified, and that there's some kind of governmental or supra-governmental organization that's going to provide them with something that they long for, and that there could be a codification of goodness, which is the biggest phantasm that anybody could chase, because goodness has to arise out of the human experience. That's the way in which goodness enters the world. And in light of this, I frequently made reference to Rudolf Steiner, who frequently gave talks to socialist organizations very early on in the socialist movement. And he said, I could talk about most anything, any subject, save that of freedom. And so that's the bugaboo, and that's what we're struggling with here in the U.S. is like you say, the Constitution, which the wheels of government are meant to be spun out of the cloth of our Declaration of Independence and Constitution, which I consider to be inspired documents in their genesis. And being that the purpose of the government in Washington was meant to be, and their primary objective was the preservation of the freedom and the liberties of the residents of the United States, and being the United States is an entity in itself, whereas it was originally intended these United States, that there were all these different states and they worked together in a limited capacity, and that the federal government was meant to be that which handled issues on the high seas and in the ports and terrorists and so forth and so forth. But the real issue regarding the federal government, as it came to be called, was protecting the freedoms and the liberties. Now, the word liberty is distinct from freedom, because liberty implies that you're being allowed to be able to be free, okay? And so liberty, the Statue of Liberty is in New York Harbor and was donated to us by a wonderful French artist. And it has represented so much for America, and that America is very much a mixture. It's not a racial nation, and people that make racial thinking the centerpiece of their thinking are totally missing the point of America. And nationalism has in the past primarily been encased within the context of races and nations and tribes and all these types of things. That's so foreign to American thinking, because American thinking is more like your friend. She came out of a slum in India and ended up becoming a millionaire. And that's the kind of golden ring thinking that America offers. But in that understanding, the tendency in America is to think that economics is the centerpiece of human culture, which is kind of something that we receive from the British, because they've been characterized as the shopkeepers of the world, and so their basic view is commerce. And so you have the 110 or so livery that are in the city of London proper, meaning London City Inc., that particular corporate entity that's 1 square mile and is in the city of London, the mega city of London, but the small square mile is a separate entity entirely, dating all the way back to the Roman Empire. And that they were given concessions. It was a trading center that was established for the Anglo-Saxons, and this square mile was a trading center with certain rights and privileges within the Roman Empire. And then as it continued on, and William the Conqueror showed up with a bunch of people, including my relatives, they attempted to overtake the city of London, but they were incapable of doing it, so they're able to cut a deal. Okay, you can keep these special privileges. And so consequently, there's that word again, consequently, these privileges, special privileges, they continue into the modern world. And so it behooves many corporations to set up an entity within the city of London, because there's certain privileges that one has, much akin to the secrecy that becomes available through all the various offshore banking associations and various trusts. And so it's this whole economic network, and the city of London sees itself as the hub of world economics, whether or not people like it or not. That is a reality that we're all facing, especially strongly at this time. And so it behooves people to become aware of this and see what is going on here. Now, there's been a lot going on lately in the States here regarding the election, having to do with what are the neural centers that are processing our voting here in America. And Sidney Powell is finally starting to approach subjects that we've been talking about for the last couple of years over at American Intelligence Media, my associates over there, and Americans for Innovation, to where we fully documented all of this. And it's really heartening to see that Sidney Powell is finally coming to understand that Citel, the company out of Barcelona, Spain, is the nexus of the vote tallying, and they have outposts in Serbia and in Germany also. So there's servers there involved, and then there's the Dominion voting company, and that's a Crown Canadian company. So these go really against the dictates that were put forward by our president in an executive order regarding foreign interference in elections. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I don't want to get into a whole bunch of political stuff here. Everybody's talking about all that. What I could do is try and shift the conversation more to what is our humanness within the context of all this craziness that's going on. But that being said, I want to give kudos to the 1 million+ people that are in Washington, D.C., peacefully giving their views about how much they love being a free American. And I wish and hope that other countries in the world can follow our lead and not allow the bureaucrats to run their world and tell them whether or not they can get the key to the bathroom. But it's become kind of ludicrous, the level of micromanagement that's being put in place around the world. And I don't need a micromanager. I was potty trained at quite an early age.
The minute we get to potty training, I know the conversation is turning serious. Where do I start? I mean, I'm sort of in the dissenting tradition, as I think people are beginning to realize now. I have a love-hate relationship with the Square Mile. You know, they love me, but I hate them. I don't know. I don't know what to say to that sort of thing. I mean, most people in this city, unless you're part of that clique, unless you're part of that bund, you know, there isn't much exchange in any sense between that part of London and all the rest of it, or that part of London and the rest of the country. You know, it's like a closed shop. It's like a sort of village within a village, and everybody knows it's there. But unless you're part of its activities, you don't really, you know, you're not on their radar, and they're not on your radar. It's quite a strange state of affairs. You know, I went once many years back. I started an arts group called Gruntlers. We all know the modern word disgruntled, but I was interested at that time in words that survived only because of a negative prefix. So you have disgruntled, but nobody says you're gruntled anymore. So I thought that was fun. And we were trying to, at that time, do deals with a rival, notice the speech marks, excuse me, rival group called Poet in the City, which invited some of these people to give their, notice the speech marks again, poetry, which all seemed to be about sex and finance. I mean, you know, someone needs to write a play about that. So all the people in the mile that turned up to this, into the Square Mile that turned up to this, could only talk about sex and finance. And also that some of the poetry was interesting, most of it wasn't. And I remember having sort of people in incredibly expensive Armani suits practically pleading with this short, fat pauper pastor to come and read some of their poetry at our gig. But I said, oh yeah, let's talk about it. But they never got in touch. They probably realized how poor I was. So I don't know really what to say about that. I mean, you know, apart from the fact we undervalue freedom at our peril, I mean, certainly, I hope America isn't sinking into any type of civil strife and disruption. Lots of people, friends of mine, are telling me that's a possibility. I really pray that isn't the case. You know, Americans have to realize, you know, is anywhere perfect? No, but they still represent a brilliant and shining civilizing light to the rest of the world. They represent that to this day. And, you know, if that happens in a country like America, that is, you know, somehow the world has become a slightly darker place and a slightly less secure place. I really hope that doesn't happen. In terms of freedom in Britain, I don't think anybody ever thinks about it. You will never be the king, you will never be the queen. Live with it. That's it. The end of the story. The end of the argument. Yeah. You will never be a member of the landed gentry. You know, if you make a bit of a dent, then they give you a life peerage. You know, well done, Lord Snot. You know, for your services to British commerce, but it doesn't mean you're anything. I mean, you know, at the minute you're dead, no one in your family benefits. So they do that sort of thing. But I mean, technically we're citizens, but we're also subjects. We're subjects of the Queen. So I think we've got to be very aware of growing up in that sort of psychic and cultural atmosphere. Does make people different. There's no pretending it doesn't. Certainly, there's always been a clash within our own system. You know, I don't like the Londinium bit because I'm suspicious of Roman senators. I like the Ludenvic bit, the Viking bit that came after that. I like that bit. So certainly there's always been a clash between Roman law and the Danegeld in this country. The Danegeld assumes you are a free warrior. You are responsible only to yourself and the gods, and maybe not all of the time the gods. You are where you are, and no one has the right to say any different. But of course, things can go wrong, and you can be accused in a court of your equals that something's gone wrong, and then you argue it out. Therefore, you're innocent no matter what until someone demonstrates beyond all possible doubt, all reasonable doubt, that you're guilty. That is so healthy. That has always been at war in Britain with our Roman law residue, where basically you're guilty before you've even opened your mouth, and try and prove otherwise then. And certainly with the way British policing is going at the moment, you'd really think that's coming back with a vengeance. I saw something to my absolute horror admittedly, it was a transmission on YouTube the other day. There were people protesting about the lockdown. What is wrong with a different point of view? I'm not one of the people that thinks COVID is a complete fabrication. I do think it's being used politically. And I think you must have your eyes and ears well and truly closed if you can't see that. One of the people on the anti-side was a fully be-kilted Scotsman with a set of bagpipes. Right, okay. My ancestors are Celtic, so I sort of love and hate bagpipes. I love them as an idea. I hate them the minute somebody's playing them. Shut up, for God's sake! You're frightening the animals. But to be fair to this guy, all he was doing was walking at the front of a very orderly and well-behaved group of protesters, playing his bagpipes, and one of the police pushed him to the ground. Hang on a second, that's not British policing. What on earth do you think you're doing? That isn't in our tradition. That sort of a security officer mindset is completely separate, and it needs to be kept separate. I suspect it's happening, that sort of dichotomy, on a much grander scale in America, which makes me personally very, very sad. Freedom, freedom, freedom. I mean, I suppose another influence on me would be the American transcendentalists, who I have a huge admiration for. Curiously, it's a Jesuit friend of mine that's going to send me a rock from Walden. I hope he's not throwing a rock from Walden, but he promised to send me a rock from Walden. So I had some sort of astral contact with Walden, and of course the authors that were in that area, and the book Walden. So that's been something I'm still waiting to receive in the post. Reverend Dr. Robert McTeague, it's about time you sent it to me. I hope you're listening to this, because that would be so refreshing for me. And of course, self-reliance. I mean, I know the transcendentalists were very suspicious of organized religion. 2/3 of the time, so am I, and I'm a pastor, so I can say it. But let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. That's where I think they went wrong. Keep our suspicions alive, but look at the benefits. There are some benefits. Self-reliance was so big with the transcendentalists. I think at the back of their thinking, at the back of Thoreau's thinking, at the back of Emerson's thinking, was something like, do you really want to be in the status of a child your entire life? Is that really what you want? Is that serving your inner needs, your heart and your mind to its best interests? And of course, I can't think of a single transcendentalist that would have said, no, we want to be in this endlessly secure environment. None of them would have thought that. At the end of the day, there's something called the existential. We live in a world with risks, and is that good or is that bad? Surely that's good. It's not only an impetus for us to look after each other and treat each other like real neighbors, it's also the chance for us to become strong and thrive spiritually in our own right. So I've never really understood this nanny culture, which is being smuggled in here. And this new leftist thing, even if I'm thinking of British socialism in that odd entity that was floating around in the late 1800s, that sounds a lot like liberality, but you call everybody brother. If you look at those days, even they didn't want that. What they wanted was equality in the marketplace. Give a working man a decent wage. I can't see what's wrong with that. It didn't work, but I can't see what's wrong with that. Excuse me. So, I think, I don't know why people want to abandon notions of freedom. I don't know why they're afraid of their freedom. And surely it does us all good at the end of the day. And I hope America just remembers its calling to defend radical freedom in the world, because without America, we haven't really got anybody else to look up to. On that note, before I have a coughing fit, I'll pass back to you, John.
Well, in light of this whole idea of freedom, I mean, really, it's this illusion, this vision that one is somehow going to exchange freedom for security, as if there is such a thing as security in the real sense. We all know what happened to Judas, right? Basically, what he did was he exchanged the whereabouts of our Lord Jesus Christ for 12 pieces of silver. And what did he end up? He ended up in a pretty sad situation. So you see that things are not always as they appear. And if you make all of your thinking depend upon the sense world, then you end up with this world of abstraction that only inhabits the periphery of the functions of the brain, that you have to penetrate into the central core of the brain and be able to warm it with the forces of the heart, to be able to enter into a type of thinking that includes your whole being. And in entering into this new phase of human evolution, in 1879, where we entered the archangelic period of Michael, the archangel with the sword, and that's the sword is the word, and so it's developing a process of connectivity to the word that is something that is lacking when you see so much of what's going on today in the media and politicians, to where you look at them and you just can see they're just bold-faced lies. They're just not telling you the truth, and they're doing it on purpose. And so you see that in light of the lecture cycle, The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness, Rudolf Steiner had said that there were certain impulses in human evolution that were core impulses that were healthy, having to do with a relationship to your nation, your clan, race, family, and all of that. And that the opposing powers were always attempting to assault that from outside, but that when the war in heaven took place between from the 1840s, culminating in November of 1879, that the Archangel Michael and his hosts had driven to earth these opposing spirits. And now it was no longer a wholesome impulse of the higher spiritual powers to be pursuing these goals of nation, race, clan, and family, and all of that, to approach them overmuch. And that's not to say that you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but that one has to be sensitive to what that might intend. And I'm putting it within the context of the archangelic periods that were first released, let's see, get it, that's by Tritemius, who was a Christian monk, and he was a very important individual, and Rudolf Steiner incorporated this into a spiritual science with some slight modification of the ages based upon his actual experience. But in getting into the crikeys, as you would say in England, what's going on here? yeah, when you start getting into the Glorious Revolution and how the Dutch German clan asserted themselves into British culture, but they were at service of these mercantile impulses of which the British are so famous. But meanwhile, there was the Jacobites that were deposed, the descendants of James I, who everybody's heard of the King James Bible, and he was, after Queen Elizabeth, he was a patron of Shakespeare and so many important things, a patron of the development of Freemasonry. And although the British would like you to think that Freemasonry is something British, it's really Scottish. And the Scots are something. I mean, I remember hearing about a German soldier, what he thought about the British military. He said, well, we can handle them, but those guys in the skirts. But here's something people never even knew existed. Here is the Jacobite peerage, the baroneted knightage and grants of honor. And that was compiled by the Marquis de Vuvigny and Reneval. And this book is one of the high points of obscurity. And in there is the separate peerage that was established by the descendants of King James I after they were kicked out. And his followers, like they came from Ireland. It's called the Flight of the Wild Geese. Some of my family went over there, and they lived in the palace of the Saint-Germain Palace, and the French king had moved into much plusher headquarters at Versailles. And a very interesting period, and it plays a really, I think, a significant role in understanding certain impulses historically, because within James was the initial impulse of religious tolerance amongst a monarch in Europe that was very significant. And you see that there were the recusant in Ireland. They're called the recusants, and that because there was a mandate that came down from King James after he kicked out some Jesuits, among which is one of my relatives, for popishness. I used to have the first edition of it, but it went the wayside a long time ago, a book on that subject from 1617. But in any regard, after they kicked out the Jesuits for popishness, then you find that there's a pronouncement that it was necessary for all the British to, or the Irish who were subjects, to attend Anglican services on Sunday. And the Anglican service, rather than being Catholic. And one of my relatives got stuck in the Tower of London for 2 years, Patrick Barnwell, and he refused, just on his own. And eventually James came around and said, I'm not going to kill somebody just because of their religious beliefs. And that was a major thing in this whole issue about the Irish being forced to attend Anglican service on Sundays was quashed. And so you have this continual seething back and forth between Roman Catholicism and Anglicanism, and it was at the penalty of death if you didn't go along with it. It was that weird situation was finally set aside by James I, and then you see through his family line going back and forth between the Church of England and Rome, and eventually the excuse that they used was that they were putting this Romish impulse, but it actually, if you look at the initial impulses of Freemasonry that came out of the builders of the palaces and churches in Scotland and then came down into England, you see that there's this spirit of tolerance. And that was actually the Jacobites were concerned with tolerance. And it's a very, very tumultuous time period. And it's fascinating. And you can look at the works of Dame Frances Yates, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, and their books on the art of memory, which has to do with the Shakespearean Globe Theater as being an attribute of the concept of Guido Stoico's Ars Reminiscenda, the art of memory, that in using cosmological themes as a means for organizing one's view of the world, that's so much a part of what's in my books, is being able to come to terms with the cosmological aspect and relation to time and space as a revelation of the activities of spiritual beings. And to bring it into the modern context, it's as if here in the US, the left, they would like nothing better than to outlaw that kind of thinking. I mean, they just want to resolve everything down to some kind of a binary codification, some architectronic system. And actually the phrase that was coined by Zbigniew Brzezinski, technocracy, it's like, we'll just winnow it down, which is basically, this whole technocracy is a development out of the utilitarian materialistic thinking that was evolved out of the city of London by our embalmed friend in the lobby there. So it's problematic. But again, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because then you get into John Stuart Mill, whose book on liberty basically said, look, it's good for business to let people be free. And so he wrote on liberty, and he was considered, as we've discussed many times on here, that there are three individuals that when they developed the idea of IQ test, there were three individuals that were rated higher than everybody else. That's John Stuart Mill, Emanuel Swedenborg, and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Three individuals of very different casts of mind. But if you get into looking deeper into John Stuart Mill, and then you see he wrote the foreword to this Democracy in America, and it was written by Tocqueville, a Frenchman who came to America, and he wrote his observations about what was going on in America, and he was very much heartened by what was able to be developed in America. But it's interesting, though, because he says democracy in America. Well, okay, good, but just so you keep in mind, America is not a democracy. So individual words do matter. And America actually has established a division of powers, threefold, of the three branches of government, so that they can prevent anybody from possessing too much power. And so we're actually a constitutional republic with a democratic means of electing our representatives. Really, if you went straight republic, I mean, basically what Plato was talking about was a benevolent dictator. But we all know how that goes. All you have to do is think of the tyrant of Syracuse. And then if you get into this whole ancestral thing, like with the Jacobite peerage and all that, okay, that works out pretty good if the guy's a nice guy. But what if his son, who takes over, isn't? And so there's this whole idea that this whole passing on of authority through bloodlines is such a thing of the past, even though it's played a venerable role in developing human culture since 1879. That stuff should basically go away, that there is no magic ancestral link that's going to give one a capacity genetically to be able to take up the reins of power in the same way. Rudolf Steiner gave the example. He said if it was just, who your parents were, then all you have to do is look at Goethe's son to see that it doesn't work out, because his son really didn't do anything, you know. And then, yet Goethe was one of the most accomplished people in history, and being a literary figure, helping run the government in Weimar, and being a member of over 100 scientific organizations, just one of the grandest figures that one can explore. And so when you get into this and you try to figure out how you fit within this context, I think the most important thing is to be able to return to the words of Rudolf Steiner. He said, if you want to hold back the unhealthy influence of the Luciferic spirits, that one can take on humility. And if one wants to push back the satanic or Ahrimanic spirits, one can do that by being satisfied with one's lot in life. Not that one shouldn't strive, but it's coming out of this comfort of seeing your own personal situation in the world, accepting the reality of it, and taking it from there, rather than spending your life resenting because you are not one of the elect or what have you. And so that's what the big problems were going on here in the US, is people become politicians because they want honor, privilege, money, and some of them want little kids. It's just all the lower elements of humanity have become goals for people of that ilk. That's why it's kind of refreshing with our current leader, because he is not, he's been there, done that. Can't buy him off. He's already got all that. He grabbed the golden ring a long time ago, and he has a very warm place in his heart for the average human being. By the way, I'm not talking about the office of the president-elect. Oh, by the way, there is no such office as the office of the president-elect. And it's good that that's going to be set aside in a few weeks, really, because there's been so much that's gone on behind the scenes. It's simple to understand how things have been so corrupted, because, to put it in the words of my dear friend Michael McKibben, who invented social media, there is no such thing as secure digital information. It's just, do you think that you could just transmit voting records to these computers overseas and they're going to tally votes for you and all that? That is a complete fabrication. It's not possible. There's so many ways in which information can become compromised. And so people have become so dependent, and because they figure, well, I can do my banking, and so far nobody's tapped into that. Maybe it's secure, but that's an illusion.
Well, a couple of things came to mind when you were speaking there. I used to like Star Trek in all of its various manifestations. I liked the new Trekkie generations, because you had sort of racial and political caricatures in abundance. I mean, clearly the Klingons were the Russians at their most disputive. You couldn't say boo to a goose and then they'd fly off the handle. I like these Borg characters. I mean, they're, robots that only do everything together. So that's the Chinese or the Japanese. I suspect the Chinese. And to my horror, I think the British are actually the Ferengi. You'd sell your grandmother for a few more dollars. And so I find that completely depressing, but probably quite close to the knuckle. Particularly because I had an argument just before coming on air today. Argument might be the wrong word. Have you noticed on Facebook, you're never allowed to answer people back, because they always disable the means by which you can say you are an arsehole. Have you noticed that? So somebody was having a go at me because of LGBT activism and saying they were libertarian, you're absolutely joking. And so I was saying, but why not be more honest? You're an extreme right-wing ideologue, and then all of a sudden I couldn't do anything. So that's debate in the modern world. So I suppose vote counting goes along in a similar direction. Whatever happened to old-fashioned stuff? Yes, it's my age coming out. What can I say? Of turning up at a polling station, putting your moniker on a bit of paper and shoving it in a box, and letting somebody bloody count it. I mean, I think in Britain, sometimes it's blatant refusal to modernise as a saving grace. I mean, for instance, there was a Barney a couple of years ago about vote counting. But it was, the conspiracy theorists didn't come off well in our particular case. There was footage on YouTube of a box. Nobody said it was for the vote. A box left for 10 minutes. I imagine during a busy evening when you're counting thousands and thousands of votes, leaving a box in a corner for 10 minutes doesn't actually mean anything. But, I mean, it just shows how little they know about our system. All the votes need to be counted in front of all of the parties. And if another party doesn't like it, they insist the count is taken again. So it's not about shoving the odd vote into a pigeonhole or a chest of drawers, because that wouldn't happen. So I rather like old-fashioned ways of the body politic of the people to show what it's thinking. I'm distrustful of technology. I'm distrustful of technology anyway. I'm trying not to be a Luddite, but I'm distrustful of it. We live in a world of broken machines, and all the AI people, Elon Musk being the most curious example. I mean, does he like AI or not? Because he was having so he's bankrolling NASA or something. I was told that a couple of years ago. And he's having a go at COVID and Bill Gates at the moment, which is hilariously funny. I'm sorry. I never really think Elon Musk can be a funny individual, but he's been funny recently. Apparently, it's probably one of those stories and it's not true, but it catches the zeitgeist. It catches the thought sphere of what's going around at the minute. That he was proved positive for COVID-19 in one day and proved negative for COVID-19 the day after. So, I'm sort of tempted to go along with that. The fact that the common cold and influenza has all but disappeared, 98% gone. Surely that strikes someone as suspicious and something is going wrong somewhere along the line. Surely it does. In terms of Britain, oh gosh, this is a very unusual administration. I mean, they're claiming to be Tories. I tend to keep out of the personal side of politics, even in Britain, because really the type of libertarianism I'm talking about, I suppose, belongs to the future, where humanity's decided maturity is actually quite a cool thing. And being a brat forever isn't actually to anybody's advantage. So it probably belongs to a future time, a prophetic state. And I'm hoping something as terrible as education helps to usher that golden era in at some point. So when people are endlessly scoring points, I noticed John Barnwell has completely disappeared from my screen. I'm hoping the very mention of COVID-19 doesn't mean he's scurrying for a vitamin D pill, because that isn't quite, although we all need them, that isn't quite what I had in mind. So Tories. This is a very unusual lot. They seem to have no regard for business whatsoever. They're bringing in absolutely draconian and exaggerated forms of COVID-19 control. How can you control a virus? Someone needs to tell me that. How can you control a virus? Okay, I can see the reasoning that if you stay at home and run the risk of mental disorder and moral collapse, and indeed the fact that you might murder your partner or start committing suicide. Suicides are rising exponentially. Whether the left like it or not, we're not just bodies, we're not just bags of chemistry. We work on a number of different levels at the same time. The human person is not encouraged to thrive under these conditions. The second lockdown is beginning to prove unpopular. But these Tories are bringing in, they're weird. They don't really seem to back business. They don't really seem worried about the things traditional Tories are worried about, and they're acting in a covertly socialist manner. We're telling you what to do. Will you go and do it? Or the police will give you hefty fines. I mean, this isn't any recognizable government. To go back to the Star Trek analogy, they're Tories, Jim, but not as we know them. Because I don't know what's going on at the minute. And if I didn't know better, I'd swear that there was market engineering taking place. There's a wonderful thing, you've probably heard of it, John, My Little Crony, which is going around Westminster Village at the minute. Who's making a deal with who, and how is it managing to benefit both parties? Oh, I went to Eton with him. He must get that contract, as opposed to anybody tendering fairly. So that's going around at the minute. And the fact they're just throwing out every single baby with the bathwater. Civil liberties. Sorry, I thought the Tories were meant to be good at preserving that. Autonomy. You're not meant to be bulldozed by the state into doing what the state wants. I mean, as I say, I'm no Tory, but I can sort of understand traditional Tories and why they don't like all these codifications, because they distrust them. No, you can't legislate for everything. I think that's very sensible. And I'm not saying I'm a Tory, but I can see where they're coming from. These are creatures of the night, and they need to go back into the outer darkness, as far as I'm concerned. Is it all about Brexit? I mean, I was one of the few people in the country. Liberty is everything. Freedom is everything. I was skeptical about the Brexit process from the word go. I fell out with nearly everybody in the Libertarian Party UK, because I wouldn't suddenly raise the Union Jack and start waving it everywhere. I thought that wasn't helpful for one simple reason. Nobody in Westminster and nobody in Brussels was talking about freedom or liberty. There wasn't a single one of them. Even Farage, who has built a career around his own proclivities, even he wasn't. I can't remember a single time that was mentioned. So what are these people actually trying to do, apart from making, this will get, you should, the switchboard should be lighting up at this moment, John, with complaints about me. Good, that's what I say. I mean, is it really all about making sure that the British High Street disappears, that the conglomerates, the corporations have a greater free hand than ever before, small businesses fall like sheaves during the harvest, and that basically these people, or at least some of them, are in the pocket, in the pay of the major corporations, half of which have far too many Chinese shareholders for me to feel comfortable? Is it really something to do with Brexit and economic engineering? This will be a name to make you fulminate. I'm now going to say something to upset John Barnwell. I used to know Noam Chomsky many years ago. I haven't talked to him for years. But one of the last things he said that I saw as an interview, I was trying to get him out to Azerbaijan. There's another story for you at some point. He said, unusually for him, he was caught for words. I can't remember what conference he was attending, and said in a strangely peevish voice, actually, Adam Smith wouldn't recognize a single thing you're talking about here. And I couldn't help but a feeling of chill going down my backbone. So if you've got an international socialist correcting a business institute on the fact it knows nothing about Adam Smith, this really is the end of the world. But on that note, with my reservations about the new British administration, I'll pass back to you, John.
Well, yes, Adam Smith and the world of money. Money. Well, unfortunately, we have characters like this. Klaus Schwab, shaping the future of the fourth industrial revolution, which is basically international grab fest by the elite globalists. And I think they had a eureka moment when they saw the collapse of the middle class that occurred in the initial lockdown, and they say, hey, let's do it again. We can grab more stuff. So everybody just shops in big lot stores and on Amazon and all the little mom and pop shops just go by the wayside, and we can go into this new globalist neo-feudalism, which is creepy. And then you have the other aspect of it, which is Saul Alinsky, a pragmatic primer for realistic radicals, rules for radicals, the mentor of Barack Obama. Okay? And Hillary Clinton wrote her thesis on Saul Alinsky. And of course, he dedicates this book here to Lucifer. Who else? So, I think that the humorous outcome when the court cases are worked through regarding the current election here in the U.S. is people are going to be astounded to find out how few Democrats there actually are in this country once you shake off the curious surge of voting that occurred in the middle of the night and went straight up to the old Joe who can't even put 2 cents together. But as for me, I'm with Richard Proctor. I'm into Saving the Constitution. Wonderful, wonderful book. Unfortunately, most people are really not that familiar with the document that represents who they are or who they could be, and having the opportunity to pursue those things. He says, who? Richard Proctor, PhD, Saving the Constitution. Oh, Klaus Schwab. Oh, who's Klaus Schwab? Well, he's not your friend, but he seems to like Bill Gates. This is a foreword by Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. So they think they have a better idea how you should spend your time, or whether or not you should even be given the opportunity to even continue being a human, a carbon unit. So the big struggle goes on between carbon and silicone. And this whole architectronic reality, and that these people really think they're going to move to the next stage of evolution by becoming some kind of android. I don't know about you, but I don't want to become a smartphone. Personally, I think smartphones are pretty stupid. I do my homework, yeah, sometimes. It's unfortunate that I've had to spend so much time the last 5 years or so in delving into the darkness, but we're in the 5th post-Atlantean period. And if you get into my second book, The Arcana of Light on the Path, you'll see that toward the back of the book, I elaborate the 7 great mysteries, what Blavatsky called the 7 unutterable secrets. The 5th mystery is the mystery of evil. And that's what we're facing right now, as we're in the 5th post-Atlantean period. And so it behooves us to be able to consolidate our relationship to that which is wholesome and that which proceeds from the spiritual world, and to be able to create a context for that spiritual awakening and not succumb to these forces of materialism to where you think that thoughts are some kind of chemical process in the brain. I remember a conversation I had with Timothy Leary years ago when I was hanging out with him when he came to Detroit. And we had a very, very interesting conversation spanning hours and hours and hours. And when he came by the bookstore, I have a question. I said, you have all your ideas about neurological chemistry and the states of consciousness and all of that. And I explained to him about an experience I had to where I popped out of my body, and I was above my head up by the ceiling for numerous minutes. And I had been earlier looking for a pencil I couldn't find. And when I was up in the ceiling, I could see the pencil was behind the chair I was sitting in. Excuse me. And while I was up on the ceiling, I could see it behind the chair. So that validated the experience. Excuse me for a second. I shouldn't eat ice cream. In any event, I said, how does that play out in your neurological model? Have you ever had an experience like that? And he was extremely honest, and he said, no. But he took it to heart. And so you see, there's many people that they're not evil in their own being. I don't consider him an evil guy, even though a lot of the consequences of his activity led to evil results, we could say, with drug culture and all of that, and his relationship to the CIA. Many of the people on the left are good people, of course. And they naively think that the government is going to bring about goodness through bigger government. Well, it's never happened before. And they can't give one example of a successful socialist or communist government.
No, was it David Cameron who started sporting around the idea of the big state, big government? I mean, terrifying, terrifying words, and giving too many bureaucrats extra jobs and extra rewards. No, I mean, we've got to be really careful about what we want and the way we think we'll get it. I mean, my proof, by the way, John has now disappeared from my screen entirely, so it's the Reverend David Parry show. Good afternoon. What proves to me that basically going back a minute, that the British are the Ferengi in the Star Trek universe, was there were lots of British actors working in the series. I mean, Patrick Stewart as Captain Picard, a fine performance, by the way, from one of our greatest British character actors, excuse me, one of our British leads. It's no coincidence for me that the head of the Ferengi is called the Grand Negus. I mean, anyone who knows anything about British TV history will remember the Antiques Roadshow, and you used to have a character going around the country called Arthur Negus, who always knew the price, what something was worth. He always knew it. What a sinister individual that was. So he'd turn up at a church hall in the middle of nowhere, and someone would bring out this priceless piece of pottery, and the bugger would know how much it was worth. So that's my proof positive that we are the Ferengi in the Star Trek universe. I'll hand back to you, John.
Oh, geez. Well, then you can become the Pope of Ferengiology. Oh, yeah. So at some point, I mean, mankind has to become possessed of innate capacity to be able to expand their idea of what a human being is. In 869, excuse me.
I think John has now got my traditional my Sunday frog in the throat.
It's that devil ice cream, I think it gets me. But in 869 AD, they began moving towards this idea that if you look in the Pauline sense, a human being is body, soul, and spirit. It's very clear. In 869, they said no, human being is body and soul, could have certain spiritual qualities. So already at that early time, they were making heresy to say that there was a human spirit. See, and it was further developed in 1869 with the Jesuit influences within the church in the ecumenical council that further hemmed in the doctrine. And so ultimately what we have is we can't rely on these external authorities, whether it be the church or government or whomever, to be able to give us what we need. We have to be able to develop out of our own being something to meet our spiritual destiny. We have to be able to live into the imagination in a way that is healthy. And that's where, in teaching things in childhood regarding myths, fairy tales, legends, and all of these sorts of things, give one a series of riddles that one can live into, and over the course of one's life, unfold an understanding which is healthy. And that's one of the root principles of Waldorf education that was founded by Rudolf Steiner. And so that's what we're looking at here. We're getting near the end of our podcast here. And by the way, if anybody would be so moved as to contribute to buy myself or David a cup of coffee, you can go to paypal.me/John Barnwell 888 or paypal.me/D Parry, Parry 777. And of course, you could find David's books on Amazon and under David Parry, Parry, and my books are available on eBay under my name. Don't try to find them other than eBay, or you'll end up paying a heavy premium. They go for as much as $1,000 on other platforms, but go to eBay and you can buy them from me directly. That being said, it's been our wonderful habit on this podcast to have David share us with a prayer that he might consecrate our human endeavor.
Gosh. My friends, listeners, my dear friend John, it's always darkest before the dawn, and this world was never intended to be anything apart from an assistance in our eternal spiritual growth. May your hearts remain strong and firm and full of light, and your minds become ever clearer under that great light, that golden luminescence, that luminosity that awaits us all at the end of our lives and at the end of time. May the Spirit of the Christ be with you now and in the week ahead. Amen.
Amen. And again, for further contact or information, the information is listed below the podcast on both Facebook and on eBay. And Reverend David, I can't thank you enough. This fortifies me for the whole week. So bless you, my friend, and bless Daniel too. And so everybody out there, thank you for showing up. And anybody that couldn't make it, you can catch us later. Bye-bye.